So I'm just going to steal a very few minutes of your discussion time just to round off the last point. Okay, that's all right. So we're talking about the three types of suffering, and I just started on the second type, the suffering of change. So there's a further point to understand. I mean, it's not difficult to understand the idea that chocolate or whatever it is that we're attached to, if we kind of see that as being inherently the cause of happiness, after a while it stops creating happiness. That in fact is a sign that it's not, technically, in terms of Buddhist terminology, is not the cause of happiness. It's only a condition for happiness. The actual cause is something else, because the actual cause of that happiness must produce happiness. Yeah? If something is a cause of happiness, by definition, it must produce happiness. So if chocolate, sometimes, happiness arises when we eat chocolate, sometimes it doesn't, the chocolate can't be the cause. It's only a condition. It's like it activates, if you like, the actual cause. The actual cause of that happiness is, again, is something inward. It is, one way to look at it is positive karma. We have to have created positive karma not only to be able to have the chocolate, but to be able to enjoy the chocolate. So, there are a lot of, we can be in depending on our state, our mental state, we may have the most delicious food, but no enjoyment. And sometimes I think of, people who are very kind of materially grasping about money. They would every day have the most finest venison and, vintage wines and everything, may not be able to enjoy them. Yeah, I'm not saying necessarily, but I think that's sometimes the case. Because of what's going on in the mind, and because it kind of, you take it for granted anyway. If you have that every day, you don't really enjoy it very much. You may have severe digestive problems. But more fundamentally, mental outlook is such. You're preoccupied with your worries about your finances. You're not probably not even really experiencing it. So. Although that that delicious food can be a condition of happiness, I remember. I think the time I've most enjoyed some food, it was a plate of plain red lentils. So now, was that because those red lentils were so much better than any other red lentils? No, it was nothing to do with that. It was all to do with me. I was in my internal state was such that I was able to be fully aware and appreciate and enjoy how they are wonderful. But most of the time, it's boring old lentils. So the real cause of the happiness is not the lentils or the venison. It's in my mind. Okay, and that's why. These objects of attachment are not reliable. If we place our refuge, our trust to create happiness in those temporary objects, then they will let us down infallibly. They will let us down eventually. So we're looking in the wrong place, really, And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with with liking delicious food or having it. But if we recognize that it is only, sometimes it's referred to, and I don't know what I'm not being a Sanskrit or Tibetan scholar, I'm afraid I don't know the actual original terms. Sometimes it's referred to as a condition, sometimes it's referred to as a circumstantial cause. It's not the root cause of happiness, okay? It's not the fundamental cause. And so, in terms of how Buddhism understands a worldly attitude, the worldly attitude is one that mistakes those temporary, circumstantial causes or conditions for the real cause, the root cause of happiness, and therefore pursuing those, we end up producing suffering. So that's type 2. Second type of suffering, and it's when we begin to recognize that is not true happiness, then we're on the way, on the spiritual path. But then there's a still deeper level, a third type of suffering, pervasive suffering, which says that, you know, we are suffering all the time, although we are kind of not aware of it. And this is quite a deep topic, and we'll go into it more in later modules, so I'm just going to speak briefly about it now. Pervasive suffering consists in the fact that we have not directly realized emptiness. So an Arya being, they begin to remove that pervasive suffering, and at the level of the Arhat, where there's no more, there's a difference between the Arya being who has attained the path of seeing. They still do have a certain level of the fundamental ignorance, the perception of inherent existence. Not while they're in meditation, but when they're out of meditation, things, you know, they still have some subtle level of suffering. But at the level of the Arhat, or that very high Bodhisattva of the 8th ground or above, there's no more of that at all. There's no more perception of inherent existence. There's no more pervasive suffering at that level. So why is that this misapprehension of reality, fundamental ignorance is called, is identified as a form of suffering? It is because until we overcome that, we continuously have the potential for suffering. Okay, so for instance, in the formless realms, you know, beings who enter this, they have no physical body, so they don't experience physical suffering. They are absorbed in meditative concentration, in a kind of, you know, blissful state for aeons, for millions and millions of years, in some cases, according to the teachings. And of course, those are the states that were sought after by some, you know, spiritual seekers at the time of the Buddha, and now that they engage in practices to enter this formless realm of absorption and pure concentration, where there's no manifest suffering at all. But according to Buddhism, they still have pervasive suffering, because the karma runs out eventually, and that being will be reborn back down wherever they still have karma to go, which might be, they might go straight to the hell realms, or they might come back here, whatever. So they have not escaped from samsara, cyclic existence. We can only escape from conditioned existence, cyclic existence, or samsara, means any state in which there is still delusions in the mind, and therefore there is still the potential to experience manifest suffering. It's interesting, there is a slight exception to that, which I was surprised to find many years ago, that I asked the question, because in the Pure Land, you can create, by creating a lot of positive karma, you can be reborn in a Pure Land. And it said in the Pure Land there's no suffering, but you don't necessarily have to have realized emptiness directly to get there. And I asked the Baha'i Lama about this, is there pervasive suffering in the Pure Land? He said no, because even though some of the beings there haven't realized emptiness directly, they can never again be reborn in a samsaric suffering state. They have created enough karma that they are on the way to enlightenment. There's no falling back. So it's not just the very fact of not having realized emptiness directly. It's the consequence that because of that, we have the potential to experience manifest suffering in the future. Okay, so I'll stop there, and we can stop the video, and we can have some questions. We've got half an hour for questions. I hope that's enough. But I know